This is my response to Ronan Myers' presentation on the Book of Amos. Three things that I really liked and that stood out to me was the very detailed introduction in the beginning, where he talked about Amos's past and how he originally was a farmer, I believe, and then kind of transitioned into the prophet. I also liked how you specifically mentioned like what he spoke out against, and also the detail of him speaking out to politicians, because oftentimes politicians were the ones guilty of greed and stealing and theft and all that kind of stuff. Another thing that I really, really liked about your presentation was your Hebrew analysis. So instead of just giving, the Hebrew word and a basic interpretation of like what it means in English and all that, you gave multiple definitions for the word, like how it's used to describe Joel, or not Joel, sorry, Amos, and then Jacob, I believe. And then you also talked about how it's used in a more general manner, like with a referring to a measuring, I believe it's, yeah, metric. And so it's kind of cool to see how the word has changed over time. It started as kind of just essentially like a way to describe Jacob's short height into kind of this use for measuring height. So that was kind of cool. I also really, really liked your conclusion. I think you did a great job wrapping up your main points and being clear and concise with it instead of just kind of leaving it up to the reader and a bunch of jumbled evidence. I think looking back, I would have done a conclusion like you did. I just didn't know if I could pull it off correctly, but no, you did a very good job keeping it, relatively short and very, very informative, just summing up the main points of your presentation without going into too much detail. One interesting thing that I learned from your presentation was Amos's prevalence, or lack of, in the lectionary. You said how he wasn't really read at all, and it's kind of interesting because he seems like such a good prophet to learn from, speaking directly to politicians and corrupt officials about their moral rot and decay, which is a very bold thing to do. And we can learn a lot from leaders in recent times who have also done the same things. And I think that it's kind of interesting to see how his book really isn't read, which more than likely isn't trying to snuff out his knowledge, but I think it's just because there's so much knowledge and wisdom in the Bible that it's hard to incorporate all of it, especially considering there's like over 70 books in the entire Bible and thousands of pages of knowledge. But no, I really think thought it was interesting, and I was a little bit shocked about how you said that Amos wasn't really read at all, considering how influential he was and how important and timeless his message was. The main question that I have for you to answer is, if Amos were to be transported into modern day society, what aspects or plagues, which are like morally wrong things, of our society would he specifically call out for their moral injustice, and why? So I think Amos was kind of the moral compass of the time, calling out anyone and everyone for pretty much any type of moral injustice, not just blasphemy or idolatry. And he didn't limit his speeches to, the poor people or people who were, less in power. He talked to kings and politicians. And so I think if he were to be integrated into, modern society over the last 100 years or so, and just seeing how everything's turned out, what do you think he would call out, considering the fact that he went for everyone? Like, who do you think he would specifically call out, because he didn't really have any limits? Like, he didn't care too much about the backlash. So, yeah. Sorry for repeating myself, but what do you think Amos would, disagree with in our society, or just something that's happened like in recent times, like the last century or so, and why? One more note before I end the response. This doesn't have to do with the main question, but I just really liked how visually organized your slide was. It, simple paragraph to follow, you elaborated on it, and instead of, providing or like spending so much time looking at the visuals and making it seem so overstimulating and chaotic, you kept it simple and concise, which is really good to do, when I'm trying to like almost analyze it and absorb information to make my response. It was really easy to do that because you didn't spend so much time, just kind of like not only just talking about nothing, but also you didn't make it, you made it easy to focus. That's what I'm trying to say. It was really, really easy to pick out specific things that I liked, not only because of your wording, but also because of how your slides looked. It wasn't too chaotic. And yeah, that just about sums up my response. So